Carson, welcome to the B2B Sales Geniuses series. This is another live AMA, this time on the topic of fact-finding questions. So the first question I have for you is, why do we need to find facts in the first place?
Well, first off, Matt, always glad to be here. This is the one time a week I get to pretend to be a genius. So I appreciate the time and always the opportunity to chat with you. Why do you need to find facts? Well, in a sales organization, or let's say you're in a sales role, or you're in a leadership role, or whatever you happen to be doing in your business or in your career, you're always in charge of finding and developing and nurturing relationships. And in order to do that, you've got to understand the motivation and the pain points and the ideas of the people that you're working with. Now, I have what I call the sales food chain, right? So the sales food chain starts with the customer. They're the center of our world. But then there are multiple different members of, yourself and your team and different partners that you may work with, or other vendors and things of that stature that are all touching the customer and all intertwined. You're also part of a food chain that includes your organization and your leadership team, and then other peers and other folks that you may work with. Everybody that you're touching in that sales food chain, you need to understand the motivating factors, how you can add value to the equation. And the best way you're going to do that is by understanding, their MO, and, spending time invested in understanding the relationship, asking about, things that they are prioritizing in their business, maybe current projects that they're working on, and figuring out where you can help, and also finding out what's on the roadmap and where you may be able to add value, because ultimately you're trying to understand what is working for them, what gaps they may have in process, and then once you uncover those gaps, you're going to utilize that in order to kind of brandish your personalized recommendation on a go forward. But every step along the way, whether you are prospecting, whether you are getting to know the client, or whether you're pressing forward with a strategy, or even from a post-sale standpoint, you're going to be asking questions, and you're going to be gleaning facts, and you're going to be using those facts to figure out what the next step of the process is.
Finding facts to determine the next steps, so that allows you to make informed decisions or make informed recommendations, right? Or ask more informed questions. I guess once you have data, you have facts, you have a baseline of what's going on, then you can ask better questions as well, correct?
Certainly. I mean, you're going to go in with your, often we prep before we go into some of these conversations, or we spend time understanding the industry, or we're understanding the client, understanding, how long have they been in business. There's so many tools that are at our fingertips today where we can research the customer, research the person that we're talking to, and or some of the additional stakeholders. So you're going to spend some time doing that. There may have been an inquiry that came from the customer that prompted the conversation. So obviously you're going to want to go in and kind of do your due diligence going in, so that you can speak intelligently about what they're asking about, or what the need may be. The other piece to that too is you're going to spend a lot of time working with clients of their ilk. You may work with other people in their industry or some of their competitors, and so it behooves you to be able to go in and say, hey, XYZ company or other companies in this field have indicated to me that this is something that they're seeing. This is a trend. This is a pain point that they have. Do you share that, or how have you addressed that? And you're just opening it up with some of these open-ended questions. That's what's going to lead to a lot of offshoot questions. So certainly the initial questions and the initial strategy around that is going to open up the dialogue, but then it will give you the opportunity to have it go into some of these additional questions. And one thing that I'll say around that too, I think the key piece in selling and having some of these, going in and asking some of these questions and driving that conversation is really about being conversational and not being wooden, not being on a script where you're asking a set list of fact-finding questions. Sure, you may do that out of the gates, when you're starting out, or when you're starting something new, or when you're starting to sell maybe a new product line, or to kind of keep you on task. You may have some basic questions that break you into that. But I think the key piece is being able to walk in and ask some informed questions, but then also being able to pivot based on the responses and bleed into the subsequent follow-up questions that you ask.
So what would be some examples of basic fact-finding questions, the ones you would start with, and of course, always trying to integrate that into an actual conversation and not, being like a robot, of course. But what would you start with in terms of questions to uncover some facts?
Great question. So when you're going into these scenarios, again, you've hopefully done a little bit of research, and you may know. Let's say the client recently did an acquisition, or they were, they've rolled out a new product, or they've had some type of change in their business. Or let's also say that you did a little research about the person that you're speaking to, and you see that you went to the same school, or you're in the same groups or have similar interests. I do recommend breaking the ice to a certain degree, especially if you're meeting with somebody for the first time, and make that personal connection. Because again, they are, just like you have a process. It's very often that your prospect has a process, and a lot of times that process is they have a wall up because they've seen so many people from a sales perspective come and go, and a lot of people that may have been very out for their own agenda. So you want to make sure that you want to get to know this person. I mean, you're fostering a relationship. Then I think it's important to start to speak directly about their business. So ask them, hey, how long have you been with the business? Describe your role to me. Tell me what you do. What are you responsible for? Because ultimately, you want to get a feel for what it is that they are doing, but then follow that up with, what projects are you working on currently? What are pain points that you're experiencing today? What is your roadmap? And get a feel for kind of where they are, where they've been, and where they're going. And again, that's going to set the foundation. A lot of offshoot questions are going to pop up because of those. So, and the other thing that I want to caution is there are often times where a client will bring up a concern, maybe an objection, very early on in the conversation, and it may not even be that overly obvious. I mean, right now you're kind of getting to know them, and you're figuring out, okay, this is maybe my strategy, and you're thinking about that in the back of your head. The main thing that you want to understand is that if a customer throws up any type of these initial objections, even if they're kind of underlying or they're alluded to, I do think it's important to broach those right then and there and ask them, tell me more about that. Tell me more about what you're experiencing there. Have you tried to, maybe remedy the situation by this method? Things of that stature. And I say that because if they're raising these issues, then that's going to ultimately, if you don't address it now or through the course of your conversation, that may ultimately be your demise. There may be other blockers or connotations or preconceived notions that they have against you or your business or your solution. And if you don't address those things right out of the chute, maybe they tried your product or service before and it ended badly, or they had bad experiences. You want to make sure you kind of broach that and find out more. Because again, you're forming a relationship, so you want to understand every facet of their business that could align with what you're trying to do there. And I think in the initial fact finding, that's what you're looking to achieve. Now, the other part of that too, and I'll be brief in summarizing this, is that you think about what you're trying to pitch to them. I mean, ultimately, are you trying to pitch the benefit of doing some type of service for them? Are you selling a tangible product that actually has to be worth its weight in return on investment? Because if you are, you want to understand some of those factors. I mean, what is a customer worth to that client? What is it worth to that client for the pain points that they're experiencing today? How much are they costing or being cost because of those pain points? Because ideally you're looking to remedy that, right? So you want to show them that, hey, if I can save you X amount for how much you're remedying, would it make sense to invest in that course of action? And you want to lead them down that path. So I think that those types of things are going to set the foundation and get you into that dialogue. The offshoot questions can go in a litany of different directions, but that's going to set the foundation. And then you want to be cognizant of what you're trying to sell. What is your end game? Because you ultimately want to uncover what gaps does this customer have in their processes that you can fill. So you want to ask questions about those specific things. If you're selling marketing, what are they doing currently? What problems have they faced with it? What strengths have they seen? What do they like about it? Because you ultimately want to appeal to the things that they like, but you want to plug in the gaps of what they're facing now. If you're selling maybe a tangible product, if you're selling something that they may or may not have today, you want to find out, because they've probably done their research and they've probably done some due diligence in this field. So find out what they know and what's valuable to them. What are they looking for in a solution? What are the non-negotiables in picking a vendor or picking a product in that line of work? And then also, what are kind of the most important? How would they prioritize the need? And I think that's what's important for you to understand. If the goal that they have is not achieved, what are the ramifications? Ask them that. And I think that it's important that you show a vested interest in them and their business. And by asking questions like that, you will.
Good. Do you have any more concrete examples? You just gave a whole bunch of them, but anything else that comes to mind? I really want to try to give as many examples as possible, because when we came up with this topic for this AMA, it was still a little bit vague for me about what it exactly meant. What are those questions? How are those questions different than regular questions you would ask? Is it like a different type of question? Is it just about uncovering their current situation? So it was a little bit vague for me, right?
Certainly.
So can you give maybe a few more examples?
Absolutely. The questions that you're going to ask, and these will also be peppered throughout. So we've kind of talked about some of the things that will set the stage. But from there, you're ultimately going to end with asking them about and getting their agreement on what the next steps are. So everything in between is going to be to try to figure out what the process is going to look like. So, ask them, what is the process that you've set forth on to make this type of decision? Do you have an RFP type process? What are the expectations that you have of a potential vendor? What are the deliverables? What do you need to see? Are there ways that I can help you in being able to see, or get some of the data that you need prior to making a decision? So you're going to be asking a lot of questions around what that process is going to look like, asking them around expectations. I also like to ask people, again, I like to explain my role and tell them, hey, I'm here to, ensure that, that this relationship and that the other relationships that you have with my organization are working. What type of cadence, I want to make sure I'm on your timeline. So ask them, what is the timeline that you've allotted yourself to make this type of decision? What are the steps that we need to take? Who are the other people that we need to be talking to and involving? Because those are the things that are going to lead ultimately to that end result, which is, your last question of that session is getting the buy-in for the follow-up conversation. And we talk about this all the time in sales, recap. You're recapping that conversation and saying, okay, well, these are the things that we talked about today. We agreed upon these items. This is the process. These are the things that you need to see. These are the next steps that we've agreed upon. Is there anything else that's a priority to you that we've not talked about today? And again, keep going back to that well. It's all about them, and it's all about how you can add value, and it's all about the things that are top of mind for them. I also like to ask, as far as, immediate projects, what can we do right away to make a difference? What are the things that I can bring to bear right now? And, I talked about this in a previous conversation with you. I like to do things right then and there when I'm on the spot. I think a lot of us as salespeople, we have a lot of momentum when we're in these conversations. And then we leave the conversation. And with every passing hour, with every passing day, that conversation loses momentum. So if you talk to the client again a week later, a lot of the momentum you gained during that conversation may dissipate or be lost entirely. They're going to forget. I think statistics say that they forget, upwards of like 40% of the information that was covered within the first few weeks of those conversations. So I think it's very important that you're very focused and pointed on getting a feel for who are the right people that I need to talk to, what are the pain points, what are they looking for in me as a vendor, what are they looking for in a potential solution, do they have a timeline for this solution, and what would that look like? And then also, I like to act right then and there, setting up those follow-ups, gaining their buy-in for this next conversation, put it on the calendar while you're sitting there. Because those types of things will make sure that you stay on track to not only meet their timeline, but to meet yours. Because at the same time, I mean, you're also working within an organization where your team has bandwidth where they have to deliver product and or service. And so you need to make sure you're alerting the right people within your team. And so from that conversation, you may be bringing in other resources or people or data from within your organization. I like to nab as much of that stuff as I can while I'm sitting there. So I can tell them, like, hey, I'm sending an email right now to this person. This is why I'm bringing them in. Is there anybody else on your team that I should invite to the next conversation? So those are the types of things that are vital. But and let me take a step back too. When you're thinking about the other questions that you want to ask throughout this conversation, try to also take a look. Get outside the box a little bit and really think about what are the different ways that their goals could not be successful, and what are the different ways that they could conceivably monetize some of the things that maybe they have at their disposal. Maybe some of the are there different product offerings that they could be doing and things that you could guide them towards? Because again, you want to be a trusted advisor. You're not a sales, you don't want to be regarded as just a salesperson in this regard. You want to be a trusted advisor, and you're not going to earn their trust without showing your interest in what they have to offer, but also showing them value in any way possible. And a lot of times that can be free offerings. That could be doing consultations with them and guiding them, and that could be being very forthcoming with different ways that you feel you could help them. So I think those are the types of questions that you're going to want to pepper throughout, because ultimately you're looking for all of the different ways that you can add value. You're looking for, a lot of times too, you're going to go in, there's an angle. I mean, there's a couple of things that a client wants to talk about, and obviously you're going to go in under that pretense. You're going to have those conversations, and you're going to want to naturally segue into the other pieces that you want to talk about. So you have an agenda as well, and you have different things that you want to talk about. So finding the right ways to pivot the conversation and evolve into the questions that you want to ask is equally important.
Okay, so what kind of questions should you ask, let's say in the first meeting? How does that differ from the questions you should ask on the second meeting, a third meeting? How does the type of questions that you need to ask change over time or evolve?
Absolutely, great question. So, as time goes by, I mean, you're going to spend. I can't stress enough how important it is to take diligent notes when you're meeting with your client and truly log the answers to their questions. Now, I'm lucky because I don't have to be that smart because I can type really fast. So I type, a lot of notes, and I can go back through those and comb back through those as time goes by. It really helps me when I'm putting together a summary, especially if I'm sending that to other people on my team that I need to engage for subsequent conversations. But the main thing that I think is important when you're looking at second conversations, third conversations, is recap that first meeting. That's going to lead you into your questions that you're going to ask, because ultimately you're going to say, okay, last time we agreed that this was a priority, this was a pain point, this is what we did to address that. What additional conversation do we need to have around that bullet item? Or is there, we recommended this change. What changes have you made? What are the updates? What are the things that have been modified since the last conversation that we had? So, the conversations, as you continue, some of them will stay the same because, again, you're still going to be gaining buy-in, and you're going to be understanding if there's additional people that need to be part of the conversation. But really, you're building toward a commitment. of some sort. You're building toward really the affirmation that this is a direction that they want to pursue. And so you're going to start asking, kind of some of those trust check type questions, based on what we've discussed. Does this look like the direction that, that you want to move in? And if not, why not? What is this plan missing? We've spent some time together. I feel like I've got a good understanding of your business today. Are there any other variables, since the last time we talked that you feel that we need to discuss today? But again, you're moving toward a commitment toward a course of action, because again, they're investing time and you take that seriously, and you're investing time. So it's important that you're being very respectful of that and respectful of the the investment made by both parties. But at the same time, you want to kind of trust check and make sure you're headed in the right direction. Asking them like, hey, do you see kind of where we're going with this, the trajectory that we're going with this project? What additional assistance can I provide if it's not going the way that they want? Obviously those are the types of things. Asking them about that, understanding, what are you seeing that is not heading in the direction that you want it to head? What additional resources can I bring to bear? And again, finding out, okay, so what's the next step look like for you? I think those are the types of things that you want to ultimately ask about. And ask them, why is moving in this direction important to you? Why is remedying this pain point? What implications does that have on your business? Because again, you're going to continue to find out more and more about this client. You want to understand what's changed. If direction changes, which it inevitably will, you'll have clients that are, that have a drastic shift in priorities for a number of reasons. And again, I think, as we always have to do in sales or in any aspect of our career, you just adapt and you find out more about why. Ask why and how questions as often as you possibly can. How can I add value? Why have these priorities shifted? How do you foresee that impacting this project? Those are the types of things that you want to continue to ask, because as things change, you want to understand why, you want to be able to change with it, and you want to be able to address those changes right then and there. And ultimately, you're going to make sure that you're operating on their timeline. You're going to make sure that you have gained their commitment, and you outline the terms like, hey, this is the product, this is the service, this is what we recommend based on everything that you've told me. You indicated that this was a pain point. You indicated that these are some of the things that you enjoy about what you're doing right now. You indicated that these are some of the things that you may have seen about my product or service in the past that you didn't like. We had a deeper dive into this program. We brought in XYZ. We brought in, Steve or Mary to talk about this. So you want to continue to summarize and recap of where you've been, but hey, based on all of that, this is what I recommend. This is the recommended course of action. We can start this by the 15th of the month. All we need is your signature. Who should I send that over to? And there you go. So, the questions are going to change, but the theme is always the same. How can I add value? Where are we from a timeline perspective? What do you need to see, and who do I need to talk to?
How does asking really good fact-finding questions influence objections from the client? So does the fact that you're asking really good questions and uncovering a lot of good information reduce the objections you're going to get?
It may not reduce it, but what it will do is it will alleviate the pain points when you get to that point in the conversation. So you can head a lot of that off at the pass. By asking good fact-finding questions, you're going to really get a better feel and an understanding of the customer's business and of their pain points and of what they're looking to achieve, and also you'll be able to understand what their needs analysis is. I mean, what are the gaps in their process, and ultimately you're going to utilize that whenever you're overcoming any objections that you field. Now, my theory is this. All objections boil down to one thing, and it's really lack of belief. Because if you were able to show a return on investment and you're able to utilize the right data, you're able to show them everything that they said that they needed to see in order to make an informed decision, and they're still not ready to do that, it's really about lack of belief. So why don't they believe? Now, they're going to steer you in the right directions. I mean, they'll tell you, hey, I've got to talk to my partner. I've got to review this. I've got, and especially like in an RFP process. I mean, obviously there is a process built in around this, and they have to do their due diligence to look at all vendors. So there are some legitimate reasons why some of these types of things can be pushed. But again, the more you know, absolutely, knowledge is power in this equation. And the more that you've invested in getting to understand the business and getting to know the person that you're talking to or the people that you're engaging at this client, the more likely that, number one, that you'll be trusted in these situations or that they'll want to do business with you. But also when they give you objections, you'll be able to overcome them because you'll have the ammunition based on the conversations that you've had. Be like, sure, I understand that you're saying that you need to look at this next year or next month or whatever the case may be, but when we first spoke, you indicated how pressing this was, how much money you're losing because of this gap in process. How did the priorities shift that made that not as much of a priority today? And it's okay to get very pointed with your responses sometimes because, again, you've spent a lot of time with this client, most likely, and you've spent a lot of time getting to know their business and understanding where they are and where they want to go. So I think it's important at that point that, yes, you absolutely use what you've gleaned in these questions in order to either head some of these objections off at the pass and or to make sure that you can utilize that information to overcome the objection and understand why they don't believe today. Now, the other part of that too is that if you spend enough time talking to clients in a certain industry, you can start to really spot very similar objections. You'll get similar objections throughout some of these different clients that you'll talk to. And so, I find that when you do that, you can start to utilize that information to your advantage. So if you know that a lot of these customers will push back because it's their busy season and they just don't have time to look at it, or they're doing budget, they're tapped out for this year and they don't have any more money, you can kind of head that stuff off of the pass and say, hey, based on when do you do budgeting? Ask them that point blank earlier in the conversation and find out when they do budgeting, when's their fiscal year run, because if they're done spending money for this year, well, maybe you have a way to make the expenditure hit next year, or you can make a case for why they should budget for your product for next year. So there's a lot of different ways that you can pivot based on what you see, based on the conversations that you're having with clients today and how you take that into your next conversation. So definitely, absolutely use that to your advantage, because a lot of times in different industries, you may get pushback that you've gotten intel from a different client that's a competitor of theirs or very similar in nature that you can use to your advantage when you're overcoming those objections. So yes, absolutely, you're going to utilize the information you learn in fact-finding later in the objections. You may be able to head some off at the pass. You may be able to make that part of your recommendation so that you can not hear that objection, but you're also going to be a lot more informed when you face some of these objections.
Carson, thank you so much for your time again, and let's do this again soon.
Absolutely. Likewise, Matt. Always a pleasure speaking, and always fun talking about things that I have passion for. And in this case, there's nothing more important to your sales regimen than fact-finding questions and understanding your clients. So until we meet again.
Talk to you soon.
All right, man. Thanks.